bridge started to sway. And then when I looked, I could see the ship. The bridge was breaking off and I couldn't stop. I just slid and I hit the ship and dropped down into the water.
31 people are dead and the south span of the Skyway Bridge is gone. Details to follow on Newswatch 8. This is Bob Height reporting live from the Sunshine Skyway. For the second time this year, the scene of a terrible disaster. Today's claiming 31 lives when the freighter Summit Venture smashed into the southbound lane of the Skyway Bridge, collapsing 1,300 feet of the structure into the bay. Now here's Frank Migliore with a report on what is the worst accident in Bay Area history.
Divers began to pull bodies from the water about an hour after the crash. By late afternoon, the confirmed dead reached 18. Coast Guard officials believe there are perhaps another dozen people in the water. Many of those people were passengers on a Miami-bound Greyhound bus. Trooper Leroy McIntyre, first officer on the scene.
I could see a couple of people in the water. I could also see that there was a bus in the water, but I couldn't see any vehicles in the water at all. I was advised by one of the drivers, which was behind the bus, that there was possibly 2 or 3 cars in the water.
Yeah. What could you see of the bus?
I could see the side of the bus, and I could also see that the door was open on the driver's side, but I couldn't see any people in the bus at all. I could see clothing, which was floating around in the water.
A boat trying to come through in weather conditions as
His
they were
car
today
skidded to a halt just 2 feet short of plunging 140 feet into the water below.
We all bailed out of the car and went back up to stop the other cars waving, and we got all the other cars stopped.
What were your thoughts when you saw what had happened and you finally came to a stop?
I figured the Lord was real good to the 4 of us.
Eyewitnesses say the Summit Venture was inbound in a driving rain this morning when it struck the span. It was not even close to where it might have made safe passage into Tampa Bay. Huge sections of the center span's steel grating lay on the Venture's bow like lost pieces from a giant erector set. There is only one reported injury on board. Tugboats were quickly on the scene. They moved the Summit Venture about a quarter-mile south, and it spent most of the afternoon anchored just about the spot that the Blackthorn went down in late January. What remains of the span hangs precariously. Transportation officials have declared the entire structure unsafe, and once again, Tampa Bay is closed to commercial shipping. At the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, I'm Frank Migliore, Newswatch 8.
Only one of the people whose vehicles plummeted off the Skyway Bridge survived today. Mike Randall got an interview with that man, didn't you, Mike?
Yes, Bob. Sometimes people in our business, Bob, as you know, can be accused of exaggerating, but it's almost safe to say that the safest man in the entire world tonight is a 56-year-old gentleman from the Bay Area. The fact that he is even alive to tell about it is simply amazing. Walter Mcintyre was awake and alert as he was wheeled out of the emergency room at St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Petersburg this afternoon. He was driving south to his job in Palmetto as he does every weekday morning and was on the Skyway when it collapsed beneath him.
I kept going, and as I approached over the high part of the bridge, the whole bridge started to sway. And then when I looked, I could see the ship, and the end of the bridge was breaking off, and I couldn't stop. I just slid, and I hit the ship, and then dropped down into the water.
Could you tell me what?
No, it was nothing. There was 2 or 3 cars right behind me.
You say, sir?
I couldn't see the bus. I heard on board the ship, after they brought me on board the ship, that there was a bus down there, but either the bus was on the other side or had already fallen through.
What were you thinking as this started happening in those few seconds?
Well, it's hard. It just happened so fast that the bridge was swaying, and I seen the ship, and I figured it was all over when I couldn't stop.
How were you able to get out?
Well, I all remember next thing was I was in the water, and I managed to get the door open, and I started swimming to the surface, and I finally made it up. And I got a lot of run, and there was a piece of the bridge there, and I held on to that.
How long were you in the water? How long were you in the water, sir, before they?
I wouldn't have any idea.
How did they get you up on the ship, sir?
They put a rope ladder over the side.
Were you
I tried to pull up, but I couldn't, and they pulled the whole ladder up over the side.
Your car actually hit the ship. Did it just bounce off?
Well, I imagine. I don't know. Like I say, it's probably what happened to my head. Maybe my head went through the windshield.
Excuse me, did you see anyone else in the water?
No.
Did you hear any screams or anything?
No, didn't hear a thing. Like I say, I held on, and I vomited a lot of water out and everything, and then finally the ship started to move, and I hollered, and there was a man up and above, and he heard me, and threw out.
It's an incredible story, Michael. Did he receive any serious injuries?
I don't think so. Perhaps the viewers could see the bandage that was on the right side of his forehead. He apparently cut himself badly there, and that will require some sort of surgery. He swallowed an awful lot of water, including some that got into his lungs. They did some x-rays, Bob, to see if there were any internal injuries, but his doctor, who spoke with us just prior to that interview, essentially said that the man was in really superb shape when you consider that he fell 150 feet.
Emotionally as well as physically. Certainly had control of himself. We are reporting from the west side of the Skyway Bridge. Right now, Frank Ahern is over on the east side. Let's switch over to him for a live report on the situation there.
Bob, it is an awesome sight, standing here on the northbound span of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, looking across at what used to be the southbound span. Just like twisted wreckage, almost like a giant erector set. It's just incredible the way it's fallen. 178 feet below, the span lies down. Also several cars, the cars and the bus that have fallen into the water also down there, along with many bodies. We aren't exactly sure how many may be down there. As you can see, 1,000 feet of the span in the water. The situation here is out about a quarter of a mile to the west. You can see the Summit Adventurer sitting at anchor right now, and a piece of the bridge still on the nose, still on the bow of that ship. It's sitting there, and ironically, it's sitting almost in exactly the same position that the Blackthorn, the Coast Guard cutter that went down here at the end of January of this year. Two tragedies in the same place within just a few brief months. Right now, the situation as far as the bridge itself goes. This span, the northbound span, of course, is the only span that's standing, and it's open right now, but it's not open to traffic. And the traffic engineers say they're going to have to check this span very carefully. It may be several days before this span is open to traffic. They expect that they will be opening it to two-way traffic on the northbound span. As far as rebuilding the southbound, they have no idea how long that will take. It could take several years. The damage estimates run into the millions of dollars. It's just too early to say about any of that right now. But it's unbelievable. This is Frank Ahern live on the northbound scan of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, Newswatch 8.
I understand the spans are insured for $32 million each. During the course of the day today, the weather hampered the recovery operations, the recovery of the bodies. A temporary morgue was set up at Fort DeSoto Park while that recovery could be conducted. Chris Rebelo has that story.
It was a grisly scene. The bodies came up from the submerged Greyhound so quickly that rescuers were forced to hold on to them before they were loaded into boats. The overturned bus was vaguely visible, its gasoline leaking to the surface. By mid-afternoon, 18 bodies had been recovered. At that point, the divers were called off for their own safety. Another storm front moved in, kicking up currents, stirring the fears of officials who believe more of the bridge is bound to collapse on top of the bus. The bodies were taken to Fort DeSoto Park, transported for autopsies along with luggage, which will help identification efforts. The mood at the park was grim, as volunteer divers and curious onlookers struggled to accept another Skyway disaster. Rabbi David Susskind came to the scene, seeking news of Hildred and Harry Deitch. The St. Petersburg couple left for appointments in Bradenton this morning. Their rabbi fears them dead.
She did have this appointment. She's a punctual person, and consequently we feel that in as much as the word has it that she had an 8 o'clock appointment in Bradenton, and assuming to make that 8 o'clock appointment she would have to leave her home along about 7:15 or thereabouts, and conceivably would be at that point of the bridge at that juncture.
And her husband.
And say they have not been heard from.
The tragedy occurred on the Hillsborough section of the bridge. Sheriff Walter Heinrich spent most of the day at the park. He had no idea when all of the victims would be identified. In St. Petersburg, I'm Chris Rebelo, Newswatch 8.
Coast Guard officials are in a closed meeting at this hour with officials from the state, federal, and local governments in an effort to determine what caused this terrible disaster this morning. Tonight's preliminary investigation was called by Coast Guard Captain Gilbert, who's CO of the base, and we'll be getting back to that story coming up after these messages. Sources have told me that the pilot aboard the some adventurer was a man named John LaRoe, a member of the Tampa Bay Pilots Association. So far, that association has had no comment on this morning's disastrous accident. Several members of the legislature are demanding action. Mike Vasalinda has a report for us from Tallahassee.
The Florida House was informed of the Sunshine Skyway accident shortly after Friday's session began. Before the day's session had been concluded, a Tampa Bay area legislator was calling for an investigation of the Pilots Association.
Since I've been in the legislature, anything that comes up concerning the Pilots Association has pretty well been tabled and shelved. It's a very highly specialized group. It's very, very strong, I think, on lobby up here, and they have been more or less untouched. And I think it's time now we break through all that, get down to the nuts and bolts of the situation and find out just how these guys operate, what their training is, whether they're sitting back and drinking coffee as that ship's going down the channel, just what's happening that's causing all these incidents.
Richmond wants either a select or standing House committee to investigate the Pilots Association. House Speaker Hyatt Brown will decide by Monday if he's going to honor that request. In Tallahassee, Mike Vasalinda, Newswatch 8.
U.S. Senator Richard Stone arrived at the bridge today to survey the damage. He surveyed the damage and now is calling for a complete investigation into the disaster. Stone called the scene a modern-day horror show. He said that he'd been across the Skyway many times and had wondered what falling from it would be like. Stone says that he will launch an investigation.
There is going to be a joint investigation between the Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board. The investigation will be joint, but they will issue separate reports. The Coast Guard will home in on the issue of the navigational aids in the channel.
I'll be back with more on this morning's disaster. Meanwhile, stay tuned for Beth Bleckman, who will have news of other events of the day.
Good evening. The tragedy at the Skyway this morning prevented the hundreds of those in Tampa's Latin community from leaving for Cuba to find their relatives. Many of the people left the Cuba-bound Anagua carrying the baggage that was intended to sustain them on the voyage, but there were others who continued to load provisions on the banana boat in hopes that the trip would begin in the near future. Just when that will happen, though, depends on when the shipping channel opens, and of course, it depends on the weather. And hopefully things are looking up.
Things are looking much better weather-wise, especially for the weekend and the first part of next week, the way things look right now. Cooler and drier air down in the eastern part of the country, and it's going to start dominating our weather. Today's time-lapse photography shows the bad weather as came in during the morning, the rain hitting the lens, as you can see, occasional heavy rain. Many areas reporting 2 inches of rain from this morning's heavy downpours. And it appears, though, we're going to go into another dry spell over the region. High temperatures today reached only 76 degrees due to all the cloudiness after morning lows of 70 degrees. And our radar still picking up some activity across the state, stretching from the Bay Area eastward to Melbourne, and also the southern part of the state, reporting still some heavy thunder showers down through the Everglades, moving now toward the Fort Lauderdale and Miami region. All this area continues to move on to the south and to the east. And our current conditions, 70 degrees, the current temperature reading, and the humidity stands at 97%. The winds are out of the northeast now at 14 miles per hour. The pressure at 29 and 80 hundredths, and the pressure is rising. Rainfall amounts here in downtown Tampa amounted to 2 and 18 hundredths inches. Taking a look at our satellite picture covering Florida for this afternoon, this is currently fair skies right behind that heavy thunder showers moving into the Everglades and the southeastern part of the country. Just about an hour and a half ago, this possibly caused a tornado at Fort Myers, though very little damage reported from that so far. Farther to the north, this next line of cloudiness then, the light showers stretching from the Bay Area to the eastern part of the state, also moving to the southeast, and then some high thin cloudiness up over the northern part of the state. No rain reported with that, but as you can see, fair weather over Georgia and the Panhandle area, and that's headed in our direction. Taking a look at the national weather picture, we find this large high pressure system now dominating the weather picture over the eastern section of the nation, and with this Generally, temperatures on the cool side. Record low temperatures over a wide area of the Midwest and into the mountainous areas of the east, parts of Virginia and the Carolinas during the early morning hours. But the temperatures did recover to near the 70-degree mark over this area. Still some shower activity in the northeast. Another storm system developing in the west and the Pacific Northwest. These are expected to join together into one large storm system in about 24 hours. Could have some effect on our weather, but right now, no, it doesn't appear until sometime the mid part of next week. Taking a look at the local weather picture, a little bit of a storm system possibly just to the northeast of the Tampa area now. Moving to the southeast, and along with that, this line of showers stretching to the east of us, and a cooler and drier air with northerly winds coming in behind this, and that's going to dominate our weather during the next couple of days, so we can expect relative humidity readings to be much lower than they were today, and quite a bit of sunshine also. So my forecast for tonight, clearing and cooler weather over the region, the low dropping to around 62 degrees by early tomorrow morning. Now Saturday, sunshine, mild and dry. High temperatures with these northerly winds could be held to around the 80-degree mark, though we are expecting a warming trend on Sunday with sunny and warm weather. After a low of 60 degrees in the morning, the high should reach around 84. The boating weather for tomorrow, winds out of the north 10 to 15 knots, in the seas 3 to 5 feet, and the water temperature right now 75 degrees. So looks as if the weather is looking up. How about the stocks?
Not so good, Jim, not so good. Prices on the New York Stock Exchange ended the week on the downside. Decliners outpaced advancers by a margin of about 2 to 1, with oil stocks well represented among the losers. The Dow was off more than 9 points in moderate trading. Volume today, 30,470,000 shares. In sports, Randy Scott reports on tonight's rainouts and some new Buccaneers donned uniforms today. Well, the weather was certainly in the news today and in sports as well.
Only word for outdoor sports in our area is saturated, Beth. If they were playing on a sponge, they might have a prayer. But tonight's high school baseball sectional championship game between Sarasota and Hillsborough High has been postponed. That game will now be played tomorrow, 1 o'clock at the same location, South Florida's Red McCune Field. Also rained out today, the opening round of the state junior college playoffs in Lakeland at Marchant Field. And tonight's Florida State League game at Al Lopez Field between Tampa and Lakeland washed out. That'll be made up on Monday night. There were 2 games in the majors today, both in the National League. Craig Swan tossed a 3-hitter as the Mets shaded the Montreal Expos 2 to 1, and San Francisco beat the Cubs at Wrigley Field 6 to 3. The Buccaneers put their recent draft picks and free agent signees under the microscope for the first time today. The first minicamp of the spring had anxious coaches and Tony Edwards looking on.
All eyes were on number 72 today when the Buccaneers opened their 3-day minicamp for rookies. Number 72 is Ray Snell, the Buccaneers' top draft choice. This 6'3", 250-pounder comes from Wisconsin with a can't-miss tag as an offensive lineman, but Ray quickly found out that pass blocking in the pros is a great deal more complicated than in college.
It's a different ball game where you have to do some things to slow the progress of a defensive lineman. It's hard. It really is.
Ray is a good one-on-one blocker. He's extremely quick, runs the 40 in 4.7, and the Bucs expect him to challenge for the left guard position.
Greg Roberts should be coming in pretty soon, so I'm looking forward to working with him and Gene Sanders, offensive guard this year. They're teaching me some things that really, helping me to progress and come along.
Snell was closely watched today by head coach John McKay. The Bucs mentor is betting that he has a future All-Pro in the young rookie. In Tampa, I'm Tony Edwards, Newswatch 8 Sports.
In golf, happy birthday, George. George Cadle on his 32nd birthday shot a 4-under par 66 that gives him the early first-round lead of the rain-plagued Byron Nelson Golf Classic. Trailing George by a shot are Mike Brandon, George Streck, and Ron Scherer. About half the field is still out on the course. The U.S. Auto Club issued an edict today. Any race car suspected of illegal alterations during qualifications for the Indianapolis 500 can be torn down for total inspection. That strongly worded announcement precedes the start of Indy qualifying time trials tomorrow. Well, it looks like 2 more Rowdies will be added to the team's already bulging injury list. Forward Peter Anderson and midfielder Peter Barilich re-injured previous ailments against Edmonton over the weekend. Coach Gordon Jago says their status for Sunday's game at Philadelphia is iffy. Speaking of Philadelphia, the Flyers nailed down one of the spots in the National Hockey League Stanley Cup Finals last night with a solid 7-3 thrashing of the Minnesota North Stars. The opening minute of play, Minnesota scored. However, Rick McLeish evened it up for the Flyers with that goal. Bill Barber then gave the Flyers a lead they never relinquished, scoring a shorthanded goal, his third, to tie a playoff record for both a series and a playoff year. Barber then tied the record for goals in a series with 9, and along the way he added an assist to give him a club record 12 points in the playoff series. The Flyers won 7-3. The North Stars, young and inexperienced, couldn't fathom the Philadelphia defense, which limited them to only 2 power play goals in 35 attempts during their semifinals. Well, we will get to see what the little lady will do, who won the Kentucky Derby in the second leg of horse racing's Triple Crown. Genuine Risk, who won the hearts of sportsmen and sportswomen everywhere with her win in the Derby, was officially entered in the Preakness today. And it was announced that the papers have now been signed. Boxer Sugar Ray Leonard will box Panama's Roberto Duran for the WBC heavyweight title. That bout will take place in late June. Beth, that's a look at sports, and we'll have a baseball wrap-up at 11 o'clock.
Okay, thank you very much, Randy. We're going to go back right now to Bob Hite at the Sunshine Skyway Bridge for a recap on this day's disastrous events. Bob?
Beth, I'd like to end this newscast tonight on a personal note. On the wall of my home hangs a beautiful oil painting of my boat under sail. It was given to me several weeks ago by a neighbor of mine. He was a very kind and generous man, a very talented artist. He was also the driver of the bus that plummeted off the Skyway Bridge today. His name was Mike Curtin. My wife and I, once the picture was framed, were going to have a party in honor of Mike, but tonight, instead of honoring him and thanking him, I'm reporting on his death. I would like to take this opportunity to extend to Mike's wife and daughter, his family and friends, and to everyone who lost a loved one on the Skyway Bridge today, our deepest sympathies. Newswatch 8 coverage of this disastrous day will continue through the night, throughout the days, weeks, and months to come, and at 11:30 we'll have a special report. This is Bob Hite signing off from the Sunshine Skyway.
So that we may bring you the following special report.
3 months ago, Tampa Bay experienced the worst disaster in its history. We were all numb to learn that 23 Coast Guardsmen lost their life in a tragic collision beneath the waters of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. It seems an almost impossible coincidence that today 31 lives were lost here. A freighter collided with the bridge early this morning. A 1,300-foot section of the bridge collapsed. In a matter of moments, 2 cars, a pickup truck and a bus, were in the water. With a sole exception, none of the passengers ever had a chance.
Good evening again, everyone. For most of us, the shock of today's tragedy at the Skyway Bridge has worn into grim acceptance. But for the families of the dead, the horror and sadness of loss is just becoming a reality. In the next half hour, we shall attempt to delve deeper into the events of this disastrous day. With me tonight at the conference table are Beth Bleckman of Newswatch 8, of course, Bill Treves of the State Department of Transportation, Patricia Goldman of the National Transportation Safety Board, Frank Cluis of the Tampa Port Authority, and Captain Marshall Gilbert, commander of the Coast Guard operations for the entire west coast of Florida. I'd like to thank you all for being able to join us at this late hour. Before we begin a discussion of the day, reporter Frank Migliore has prepared a synopsis of the terrible events that have transpired. Frank's report, and then we shall return with our panel.
It was a grisly scene. Coast Guard divers began to pull bodies from the water about an hour after the crash. They came up so quickly that rescuers were forced to hold on to them as they were loaded into boats. Many of the victims were passengers on a Miami-bound Greyhound bus. Trooper Leroy McIntyre, first officer on the scene.
I see a couple of people in the water. I could also see that there was a bus in the water, but I couldn't see any vehicles in the water at all. I was advised by one of the drivers, which was behind the bus, that there was possibly 2 or 3 cars in the water.
Yeah. What could you see of the bus?
I could see the side of the bus, and I could also see that the door was open on the driver's side, but I couldn't see any people in the bus at all. I could see clothing, which was floating around in the water.
The Greyhound sits beneath the rescue boats in 20 feet of water. It is barely visible. Gasoline leaks to the surface. By mid-afternoon, divers recovered 18 of the victims, but at that point they were called in. The weather, which changed several times today, was taking a dark turn. A storm front moved in. It kicked up a strong current, and there were warnings of 40-mile-an-hour winds. The Coast Guard removed the bodies to Fort DeSoto Park on Mullet Key, and they brought what luggage they could find to help identify the victims. The grim scene conjured memories of Coast Guard efforts in January when they set up a makeshift morgue here for victims from the Blackthorn. There was one bright spot in the midst of the tragedy. 56-year-old Gulfport resident Walter Mcintyre survived the bridge collapse. Mcintyre was awake and alert as hospital personnel wheeled him out of the emergency room at St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Petersburg this afternoon. He was driving to his job in Palmetto, as he does every weekday morning, when the bridge gave way.
As I approached over the high part of the bridge, the whole bridge started to sway. And then when I looked, I could see the ship, and the end of the bridge was breaking off, and I couldn't stop. I just slid, and I hit the ship, and then dropped down into the water.
Could you tell me what?
No, there was nothing. There was 2 or 3 cars right behind me.
You say so?
I couldn't see the bus. I heard on board the ship after they brought me on board the ship that there was a bus down there, but either the bus was on the other side or had already fallen through.
What were you thinking as this started happening those few seconds?
Well, it's hard. It just happened so fast that the bridge was swaying, and I seen the ship, and I figured it was all over when I couldn't stop.
And St. Petersburg resident Richard Hornbunkel escaped death this morning by just inches. His car skidded to a halt just 2 feet short of plunging into the water 140 feet below.
It was raining, cats and dogs, of course. It was dark. The wind was blowing like a hurricane. I was driving at about 20, 25 miles an hour. A Greyhound bus, I believe, or some type of bus, passed me, doing about 30, 35, very slow. On the outside lane, I switched over. There was a stalled car here and got in behind him. And as I came to the very top of the bridge here, I saw the rest of the bridge was out and applied their brakes immediately and stopped with them in about 2 feet of going in.
Do you ever think about weird things like that when you drive over here?
Yes.
Are you afraid of this bridge normally?
I think they ought to do something about this boat traffic here. A boat trying to come through in the weather conditions as they were today was kind of a bad decision.
What did you do right after you saw all that stuff?
We all bailed out of the car and went back up to stop the other cars, waving.
What were your thoughts when you saw what had happened and you finally came to a stop?
I figured the Lord was real good to the 4 of us.
Eyewitnesses say the Summit Venture was inbound in a driving rainstorm this morning when it struck the span. It was 800 feet south of where it might have made a safe entry into Tampa Bay. It is as yet unknown how the Summit Venture missed the channel by so wide a mark. Huge sections of the center span steel grating lay on the Venture's bow like lost pieces from a giant erector set. Yet other pieces of the bridge are clearly visible in the water. Tugboats were quickly on the scene. They moved the Summit Venture about a quarter-mile south, and it spent most of the afternoon anchored just about the spot that the Blackthorn went down in late January. What remains of the span juts out precariously, a Damocles sword hanging over what will change from a rescue to a salvage mission in days to come. Transportation officials have declared the entire span unsafe, and once again, Tampa Bay is closed to commercial shipping. At the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, I'm Frank Migliore, Newswatch 8.
Official reaction to the tragedy came quickly. In Tallahassee, the legislature paused for a moment of silent prayer for the victims when the tragedy was announced. Before the day was out, at least one Bay Area legislator called for an investigation of the Pilots Association.
Since I've been in the legislature, anything that comes up concerning the Pilots Association has pretty well been tabled and shelved. It's a very highly specialized group. It's very, very strong, I think, on lobby up here, and they have been more or less untouched. And I think it's time now we break through all that, get down to the nuts and bolts of the situation and find out just how these guys operate, what their training is, whether they're sitting back and drinking coffee as that ship's going down the channel, just what's happening that's causing all these incidents.
So far, the Tampa Bay Pilots Association has refused repeated requests by Newswatch 8 to comment on what might have happened in today's tragedy. U.S. Senator Richard Stone in the Bay Area today said there will be other investigations.
There is going to be a joint investigation between the Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board. The investigation will be joint, but they will issue separate reports. The Coast Guard will home in on the issue of the navigational aids in the channel. And also there will be a State Department of Transportation investigation and repairs, but there may be some conflict because of the possibility of federal involvement because it's an interstate.
There are four main elements involved in this maritime disaster: the Skyway Bridge, the ship, the Summit Venture, the people who were aboard the ship and on the bridge, and the weather. Before opening the discussion, let's first find out from our meteorologist Jim Smith what the weather conditions were at 7:39, the hour of impact this morning. Jim?
Well, heavy rains and strong winds over the area this morning, but Bob, we first went back and looked into the history of this storm. It started yesterday afternoon in eastern part of Texas and brought winds as high as 70 miles per hour, then moved into the Gulf area and eastward. We picked it up last night on our satellite picture as the black area in the center of this picture shows the heavy thunder showers moving south of the Mississippi Delta area, moving eastward, headed for Florida, expected to arrive sometime during the early morning hours. As these storms move across to open waters, they generally build very high into the atmosphere and then produce heavy amounts of rain, such as we've had. Along with the rain, you get a strong gust of wind. These winds occasionally reaching a hurricane force out of a thunderstorm and moving generally ahead of the storm. This appears what was happening this morning as the squall line at 7 o'clock this morning moved into the central regions of Pasco through western section of Hillsborough and the eastern part of Pinellas County, moving southeastward at 35 miles per hour. Winds at the surface of the airport reporting gusting to as high as 35 miles per hour. The strongest winds officially reported were at Sarasota-Bradenton Airport, where they reported sustained winds at 50 miles per hour at 8 o'clock. The difference between this area is the Skyway Bridge from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock when Sarasota had its strong winds. Definitely they could have been experiencing poor visibilities plus winds reaching hurricane force. That's the way the weather shaped up this morning.
Thank you, Jim. Captain Gilbert, keeping in mind what Jim has just told us, I want to get right back to the weather and the conditions at the time of the collision. But first, can you bring us up to date on the search for any people who are still missing, or is there any possibility of survivors? I know when the Blackthorn was down, there was the remote hope that perhaps somebody was trapped in an air pocket somewhere.
Well, I don't think that air pocket would be any possibility at this time. We will continue our search tomorrow morning with helicopters and small boats. We also conduct a shoreline search with some of the local officials, surrounding county people, and we will continue the search until sometime tomorrow at least, and probably sometime tomorrow, if we haven't had any productive results from the search, we would terminate it.
Sir, it appears the Summit Venture encountered on or about the time it collided with the bridge and perhaps was already in, prior to its collision with the bridge, some very, very heavy weather. Jim has described the possibility of winds in excess of hurricane force, over 75 miles an hour. The ship was not loaded, therefore it was light. It was high out of the water. She had a lot of freeboard, a lot of windage. Is it possible that this accident today was simply an act of God and that the ship, when hit by a sudden gust of 80-knot winds, was blown off course and into the bridge?
Well, I don't know if it was an act of God or not, possibly an act of the devil. The only information we have on the weather, our station at Egmont Key reported weather of 20 to 25 knot winds at that time and some rain squalls moving through the area. We had similar wind conditions at our station at Bayboro Harbor. I talked to the pilot briefly on the ship. He reported a force 7 wind, about 35 knots at the time of the collision. Visibility was very poor. Visibility was almost zero when our first search vessels arrived.
You've spoken to the pilot. What did he say happened?
Well, he didn't go into a great amount of detail. He said that they were inbound, as you know. They struck the abutment there supporting the south part of the span, that the bridge fell.
Excuse me, sir. He said they struck the abutment. Did he say why?
No.
Did he describe the visibility? Could he see the bridge?
He said visibility was very poor. He didn't go into how far he could see. He didn't elaborate. He said wind conditions were about 35 knots, very poor visibility.
At what point in time does he have to say what led up to the collision?
Well, as you know, there's a number of investigations that are going to be in progress. The Coast Guard will convene a board which will start next week. They have the power to subpoena him for testimony, and I'm sure they will do that. The National Transportation Safety Board will also be investigating it. And I understand a number of other agencies. I believe the last count was something like 8 different bodies that could or will investigate it.
Thank you, sir. Beth?
Let me continue on the line of the weather for just 1 minute, Captain, if I may. If weather is such a factor, if we know we're having a squall line coming in, if visibility is that bad, are there special procedures, operations that should be taken by these ships coming in or going out?
Well, the weather is available to ships coming in and out. The port's usable as long as it's open, and it was open this morning. Of course, those kind of weather systems move in and out quickly, especially in this time and during the summer months.
What kind of conditions would necessitate saying, hey, don't come in, hold off a minute until this thing passes?
No, we haven't had those kind of conditions since I've been here. There's been no closure of the port because of those kind of conditions.
When visibility gets to a certain point, are there any restrictions put on travel?
No.
Do you foresee anything like that?
Well, I think these are the kinds of things that the investigating body will have to look at. These ships have radars and fog signals and those kind of things to help them navigate through adverse weather.
Ms. Goldman, there are other ports in the United States that have a vessel traffic control system not at all unlike air traffic control systems, where every ship entering and leaving the harbor and in the harbor is on a radar screen, and the controller, who is in a tower not unlike a control tower at an airport, knows what speed that vessel is traveling, what its course is, and it has like a flight plan. That has not been implemented in the port of Tampa, though the port is, I believe, the 8th largest in the nation, and has a tremendous amount of ships coming in and out of here every day. Do you think that Tampa qualifies for that type of control and should have it?
Well, what kind of vessel traffic service this port has will be one of the should have, or recommendations for change would be one of the things that will come out, I'm sure, not only of this case but the previous one of the Blackthorn that we were here on. At the risk of contradicting you, I think you give a little more sophistication to the vessel traffic services that are operating. Then the comparison is frequently made to aviation, but they are not exactly quite that simple. They range from as simple as just logging, if you will, the vessels that are going to be in the area, so that, and it's usually voluntary. There have been many efforts to get to a more sophisticated system, but they are only a few really operational. There is a movement towards that. The National Transportation Safety Board has argued for that in several ports. We have not made a recommendation to this date with regard to Tampa.
Frank Lewis of the Tampa Port Authority. Frank, do you think our port qualifies for it, and do you know of any smaller ports that already have this vessel control system?
Well, I only know of a few major ports in the country that have something along the sophistication of what you were talking about. We would certainly be receptive to looking at any system that would improve or enhance the flow of cargo and safe flow of vessel traffic, but we would only do so on the recommendation of a board like the National Transportation Safety Board.
Bill, let me ask you something. With the Department of Transportation, you're basically responsible for the safety on the bridge. This is the third time in 4 months that a ship has hit the bridge. On the southbound span, there were collisions in 72, 73, 76, 77. Wasn't it inevitable that this was going to happen again and can happen again?
Well, no, I don't think it was inevitable. There have been several incidents on the bridge. Up until about the last 3 or 4 months, the incidents have always been on the trestle portion of the bridge or the low section of the bridge, and they've been reasonably minor in nature. As was pointed out, the channel is 600 feet wide, which is a reasonably wide channel in my opinion, and from face of pier to face of pier is over 800 feet. So I think that ships have a good opportunity to pass through the bridge safely, and of course the bridge was built with permits both from the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers, who has the decision making about openings and heights of bridges and so forth. So I can't say it was inevitable. It was very unfortunate that it happened.
In the past few years, we've been bringing in larger ships. The traffic has increased because of the port expansion. Is the channel still wide enough to handle all of this?
Well, I think that Frank would be in a better position to answer that kind of a question, but the span is, as I said, more than 800 feet wide.
Is it
Yes,
wide
it
enough?
is. We think it is. We think it's wide enough. However, we're obviously deepening the channel to improve the safety, and we're widening it also, not only to handle the larger ships, but to make it safer.
And that will also handle the traffic, or do you think there are going to have to be steps taken in addition to that?
Well, we can widen the channel. You can't very well widen what was today, unfortunately, in a sense. You can't widen the opening that the ships pass through in the Skyway Bridge. In deepening the channel and therefore making this bay of ours accessible to much, much larger ships, do you feel that the safety precautions have kept pace with the increased shipping and tonnage going in and out of this bay?
Well, I think that's going to have to be evaluated, and obviously there's something that may not be quite right, and like I said before, we're willing to look at just about anything that would help improve the situation.
The one question everyone is asking, in light of the fact that there have been a number of near misses over the years, is why a fender system was not installed around the bridges. I mentioned to you before we went on the air tonight, Captain, that perhaps to protect the bridge from a ship that size, you'd have to build a fender system as big as another bridge. Is there, now fenders, of course, are pilings, concrete abutments, anything that could prevent a ship from getting to the bridge to strike it. Is there a fender system that could be built that could prevent the ships of this size from hitting the Skyway Bridge?
I don't know, Bob. That's a tough problem. As you know, this bridge is a very substantial structure, and we've witnessed what happened to it when the ship hit it. I don't know if it could be protected that way or not. I'm sure that's something that'll have to be looked at.
I wonder how substantial the bridge actually is. We've had reports over the years that it wasn't as substantial as it should have been the day the last contractor walked off the job. There were reports then of cracks in the concrete and questions about the materials that were used in the bridge. Do you think the bridge was substantial to begin with? And was it maintained properly? Had it been maintained better? Might it have held up to this blow today?
I don't personally think so. I think that's something that will come out as part of this investigation, but the energy of a vessel of that size moving is tremendous. I do think that the bridge has been properly designed, properly built, properly maintained. There have been some questions concerning some cracks that have become visible in the piers, and we have been investigating them. The investigations we've had have indicated that they are not anything much more than surface type cracks at this time. However, we are investigating those kinds of things. But the structure has stood for, well, that was the newer of the two structures, started in 1966. Exactly the same design as the other bridge that was built, open to traffic in 1954. But in my opinion, I think it's been properly taken care of.
If the Skyway was going to be built again today, would it be built any different? Would you have any recommendations to change it?
I would think that would really depend upon the authorities' guidance as to the kind of vessels that are going to be entering the port and so forth. The type of structure that was built is a very conventional steel truss type structure. You know, there are other kinds of bridges. I think none of them would be able to withstand blows of heavily loaded freight ships and so forth. But there are different kinds of structures that could be. But of course, you know, there's also tunnels that have been built under shipping channels. It's not very practical in this area, but you know, those kinds of things have been done.
Ladies and gentlemen, we only have about a minute left, and I apologize for having so little time available to us tonight for this subject, which we will be examining at length for months to come. One of the main concerns right now, in light of the fact that the bridge is out entirely, is how is traffic going to be moved north and south on the west coast of Florida?
Well, I've had a group of gentlemen out from our bridge inspection today checking the structural adequacy of what was the northbound bridge. And as soon as we are able to get a report as to the structural adequacy of that, and the reason I say that is some of the debris from the bridge did strike the other bridge. Once I get a report as to the condition of the bridge, and everything I've heard so far has been very favorable, we anticipate opening that bridge to two-way traffic. And hopefully that will be done very soon.
Another question for Frank. Again, traffic coming in and out of the port, once again it's stopped. Any idea as to how long this is going to be?
Well, this is totally dependent on the salvage operation, which hopefully will be as soon as possible.
Okay.
Unlike the Blackthorn, this incident is totally closed down the channel.
What can be the long-term effect on the port from something like this? I mean, aside from economical, which is obvious, is the Port of Tampa gaining a reputation around the world? Hey, we don't want to go in there anymore. What's going
Well,
to be?
we hope it's not gaining that kind of reputation, but obviously this type of thing is not good for our image around the world, and we're very concerned about that.
What does it cost our economy on a daily basis when shipping can't
that's
come out?
another question. It's very difficult to put your finger on, but I think it's safe to say it's in the millions, and it's very widespread, not just locally, but it's felt on a worldwide basis.
I understand each span of the bridge is insured for $32 million. Is our industry insured as well for this sort of thing?
Well, there is to a certain degree, but obviously you can't insure jobs that people could be laid off for and that sort of thing.
That certainly comes at an especially bad time in our economy. Beth?
I'd like to ask Pat a question. There are going to be several investigations, as many as 8. Is the National Transportation Safety Board going to be kind of coordinating it all?
Well, as Captain Gilbert said, there will be a Coast Guard Board of Inquiry next week. Several of our staff people will be participating with that board, I believe. However, we have a broader area to cover than that which the Marine Board will. As was said, we have areas and responsibility in the highway area, bridge design, as well as the marine aspect. So we hope that perhaps some of the other organizations that are conducting will be parties with us to handle the broad scope. These things are never just one thing. Weather, navigation, there are usually many factors involved, so we hope that the other groups will be coordinated with us.
It's a big job. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us tonight. This is a story which will go on and on for months to come in the Bay Area. We now rejoin our regularly scheduled programming.